Hey guys. Well, let's begin. Tonight we step barefoot into the middle of a medieval winter. And I do mean barefoot. The sky is a low-hanging grey that hasn't smiled in days. You can see your breath indoors. Your cloak smells like wet sheep, because it probably was a sheep, and your fingers haven't felt warm since All Hallows Eve. The roads are slick with a muddy crust of snow and muck, and you can hear your own teeth trying to start a percussion ensemble in your mouth. To be honest, you probably won't survive this. So, before the lights go out, click like and subscribe, but only if you're brave enough to return tomorrow night. Post your location and local time in the comments, so I know who else is freezing out there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, because silence makes this story worse, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a medieval village as dusk smears itself across the horizon. Not that it matters. The sky has felt like dusk all day. You're wrapped in a handful of scratchy wool layers, but they're soaked through from last night's sleet storm. Your boots squelch with every step. They leak more than they protect. Beneath your feet, the snow isn't white and powdery like you hoped. It's grey, churned by hooves and cartwheels, laced with soot and worse. The huts you pass are low and lopsided, leaning into each other like old gossipers with bad knees. Thatched roofs are blanketed with snow, though the heat from inside is too pitiful to melt it. A woman is outside chopping wood with a hand that barely fits around the axe. She nods to you grimly. No one smiles in winter, not because they're unfriendly, but because their lips are too cracked. You step into your own hut. It smells like wet straw and tired bodies. The door creaks shut behind you, blocking out some of the wind but none of the cold. The place is no bigger than a horse stool. The fire pit in the centre is spitting out weak flickers of orange, barely licking the iron pot dangling above it. What's cooking? Something thin, mostly water, flavoured faintly with turnip and hope. The walls are made of wattle and daub, basically sticks smeared with a mix of mud, dung and straw. And you can tell. The breeze finds every crack and pokes at your skin like a rude sibling. It's not insulated, and the ceiling is low enough for you to bonk your head if you stretch too far. A bed, if you can call it that, sits in the corner. More on that nightmare later. For now, you throw your cloak over a stool, and it lands with a squelch. Everything's damp. Always. There's no such thing as indoor plumbing or central heat. Instead, you've got a small fire, maybe a dog curled up near it, and piles of straw to catch whatever warmth escapes your own body. You sleep close to the fire, but not too close, or you risk waking up roasted on one side and frozen on the other. Good luck, turning over in the night, especially with 3 other people wedged beside you. Out in the fields you used to gather food, tend animals, and pretend the sun would return soon. But now the fields are covered in frozen mud and quiet despair. Most of the animals have been butchered or moved inside. The few chickens that remain are angry and molting, and even they seem to be giving you side-eye. If you remember hearing someone say that during the Little Ice Age, which really kicked in from the 14th century onward, temperatures dipped so low that the Thames River in London froze solid. Markets were held on the ice. Fun fact, or horrifying omen. Up to you. And while that might sound whimsical, like something out of a snow globe, it meant shorter growing seasons, widespread crop failure, and, well, fewer toes to go around. Straw is your insulation, your bedding, your rug, and occasionally your dinner, if you're unlucky. It's jammed in cracks in the walls, laid in corners to absorb leaks, and stuffed in your boot like medieval foot warmers. It doesn't work, but at least it smells slightly better than the latrine out back, which you're trying very hard not to think about. You check your fingers. 3 of them are turning that strange purple gay colour again. You rub them briskly, but sensation doesn't return. You quietly whisper to yourself that it's not frostbite. Historically, even in areas like France or the Germanic states, winters could mean more than inconvenience. They were death sentences for the poor. It wasn't uncommon for villagers to find bodies in the snow come spring, folks who wandered off looking for food or heat and simply didn't come back. Historians still argue whether mortality rates truly spiked during winter months or if the records are just incomplete. But one thing's certain: cold didn't discriminate. The fire pops. A log splits with a sharp crack and a piece tumbles to the side. You jump, then shuffle forward to push it back into place. You burn wood like your life depends on it, because it does. But supplies are low, and there's only so much left stacked by the door. You hear a sound outside. Maybe wind, maybe wolves. You're not sure which is worse. Either way, you don't open the door. You just sit back down and pull a threadbare blanket tighter around your shoulders. The itch starts almost immediately. You try to ignore it. That's just life now. Someone mutters something from the bed pile. Probably a prayer. Or a curse. Hard to tell in the dark. You lean against the wall and close your eyes. But it's like sleeping in a meat locker full of old boots and damp dogs. Outside, the snow falls quietly. Inside, your breath hangs in the air like a ghost waiting for your body to catch up. It's only December. The fire's still smouldering, barely. You stare at it from across the room, watching it spit and sigh like it's tired too. You'd like to believe it's offering warmth, but really, it's just making shadows dance and eyes sting. The smoke curls up into the thatch above, but not before it takes a few laps around the room like an uninvited guest. See, medieval chimneys weren't what you think. They barely existed in most peasant homes. Some richer households had a smoke hole in the ceiling, just a square patch where the cold and smoke competed to enter and exit. You've got gaps between your wall slats and the door that doesn't quite fit. That's your ventilation system, and no, it's not doing its job. You shift closer to the hearth and instantly regret it. The fire is more smoke than flame now. Your eyes water, your lungs burn, and the warmth you were chasing? It slips away before it ever touches your fingers. You cough once, then twice, and wonder, not for the first time, if you're just slowly seasoning yourself into a smoked ham. Some say smoke drives out evil spirits. In your case, it drives out the will to breathe. You glance upward. The thatch ceiling is black with soot, like an upside-down fireplace. It's the kind of grime that settles on your skin and refuses to leave. You run a hand through your hair. Bad idea. Now you smell like you've been roasting yourself for dinner. Fire's supposed to be a friend, a saviour even. But in winter, it's a fickle one. You can't leave it alone or it dies. You can't feed it too much, or it eats your house. You remember hearing about an entire village that burned down in 1276 after a cow knocked over a hearth. One cow, one spark, one cold night, and poof. Toasted hamlets and screaming neighbours. Historians still argue whether that was an isolated incident or one of many, but accidental winter fires were as common as frostbitten toes. Speaking of toes, you wiggle yours. Or try to. They're stiff, half asleep in your boots. You're pretty sure your left pinky toe gave up somewhere around midnight and hasn't made a peep since. You consider taking your boots off, but the thought of putting them back on? That's a horror film in itself. Someone once said you can tell how poor a home is by how low the fire burns. Yours barely whispers. And the fuel? Well, good luck. Firewood is scarce. The best logs go to the manor house, and what's left is what you can scavenge. Damp sticks, bark, maybe peat if you're lucky, and if not, dried dung. Yes, dried dung. It's not glamorous, but it burns, sort of. Not well. Not without a smell that clings to your nose hairs and settles in your clothes like bad news. But it's warmth. Kind of. Okay, not really. You toss a fresh stick on the fire, hear it hiss in protest, and watch the smoke thicken like soup. You're not entirely sure if you're warming yourself or slow-coking the air around you. In the corner, your neighbour wheezes. He's been sick since the feast of St. Nicholas and blames it on the fire. He says it's the bad air, that it settles in the lungs and breathes demons. You nod, partly out of politeness, partly because he might not be wrong. There's a strange middle ground here where everything is a little bit dangerous but also necessary. Fire, smoke, cold, breath. None of them can be trusted, and yet you need them all to get through the night. A fun tidbit you once overheard from the priest. The Saxons used to build their homes without separate hearths, so the fire pit sat right in the middle of the floor. People cooked, warmed and slept around it. If it flared too high or went out entirely, too bad. Guess which version you have? Yep, the bad one. You turn to stir the pot again. The stew is more of a memory of stew-boiled cabbage with maybe a trace of old sausage. If food's supposed to warm the soul, this stuff leaves yours shivering in a corner. Still, it's hot, and hot matters. You ladle out a bowl, clay, chipped, probably used by at least 5 other people before you. It burns your hands a little, which almost feels good. You sip carefully. It tastes like wet leaves and defeat. A child nearby lets out a coughing fit. The air is thick enough to chew. You swear you can see it, like fog hugging the walls. Everything is grey. Your soup is grey, your socks are grey, even your thoughts are getting there. You lean back, breathe in, and promptly regret it. Your lungs reject the air like it's a bad idea. And it is. But this is survival. A delicate balancing act between not freezing and not choking. You can't open the door too cold. Can't close the floor. Wait. What flu? You don't have one. You have smoke. Smoke and a few gasps of questionable oxygen. Even the dog's eyes are watering. He curls tighter near the fire, tail twitching in his sleep. You envy him. He doesn't need to worry about firewood rations or who used the last twig. A sudden gust of wind forces itself through the door frame, and the fire shudders. You leap up and hurl more fuel on it. Damp sticks, a piece of a chair leg, something unidentifiable but burnable. The flames claw back up, weak but angry. You sit down, hair full of ash, lungs full of smoke, and wonder, how did anyone survive this? Well, some didn't, but others, they adapted, lived in smoke-thick huts, coughed through entire seasons, and still managed to laugh occasionally. Mostly at you, when you tried to fan the smoke out with your hands. Doesn't work, by the way. Just makes it angry. You shift again, trying to find the one warm spot in the room. There isn't one. But there's a less cold corner, and that's enough. Outside, the wind howls like it's auditioning for a ghost story. Inside, the fire finally crackles with something resembling effort. For now, it's not much. But it's not nothing. And in a medieval winter, not nothing is the best you're going to get. You inch away from the fire, smoke clinging to your clothes like a jealous ghost, and shuffle toward the straw pile that masquerades as your bed. It's a pitiful thing, flat, lumpy, and suspiciously damp in the middle. You can't remember when it was last changed out. No one can. You lower yourself onto it and immediately regret the decision. Crunch. Something sharp jabs your back. A twig, a bone, possibly a button from someone's tunic 3 winters ago. This is not your own bed. Well, it is, technically, but not exclusively. You share this pile of straw with 3 other people. Your cousin who talks in his sleep, your grandmother who wheezes like a bellows, and a neighbour who just needed a place to stay 6 months ago and never left. He sleeps like a log and snores like thunder. You lie shoulder to shoulder, sometimes face to feet, wrapped in whatever layers you haven't already burned or worn today. Personal space doesn't exist here. It's a myth, like hot baths or cheese that isn't hard enough to kill a man. You curl into yourself, trying not to touch anyone's cold toes, but they always find you. Like revenge. The straw pokes through your tunic. It smells of mildew and barn, which is fitting, considering many homes double as barns this time of year. The animals are brought inside, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. They give off heat, and frankly, they smell slightly better than your cousin's boots. If you're lucky, you might have a flea-infested wool blanket to drape over your pile. If not, it's just you, the straw, and the body heat of your roommates. And fleas. Lots of fleas. They're as committed to the bed as you are. You scratch the back of your neck, then your ankle. One spot stops itching, another begins. You're being eaten alive by invisible dinner guests, and there's nothing to do but accept it. That, and maybe offer them a name, and ask them to keep it down after midnight. Medieval beds, at least for the poor, weren't really beds. They were nests of straw, maybe layered with bracken or moss. If you had a bit of money, you might own a mattress stuffed with feathers or wool, but that's a luxury for the gentry, not your cold behind. Some even stuff their mattresses with rags. Yes, literal scraps of fabric. That's the level of comfort we're working with. Historians still argue whether the average peasant bed was ever actually off the floor, or if the idea of a raised frame is just wishful thinking. Either way, you're on the ground, and the floor is colder than the devil's handshake. The walls aren't much help. They might offer privacy, if you're lucky enough to have a curtain separating the bed space. But privacy's relative. You can hear everything. The coughs, the snores, the constant low-level arguing over who stole whose turnip 3 days ago. Above you, the thatched roof groans in the wind. A snowflake slips through a crack and lands on your face. You blink. It melts instantly, which is somehow worse than if it hadn't. You pull your blanket tighter and whisper threats to the roof. Some homes had lofts, sleeping areas raised above the rest of the hut to catch what little heat rose from the hearth. You? No loft. Just one open room with 8 people, a goat, and the faint smell of despair. But hey, at least you don't have to sleep outside. People did, you know. During feasts, festivals, or overcrowding, some were relegated to barns or outhouses, or wherever there was space. In winter, that often meant death. If you nodded off under the wrong tree, you might not wake up. Entire bodies were found half buried in snowdrifts, hands clutching cloaks that didn't quite do the job. You shift again and bump knees with your cousin. He grumbles something unintelligible and rolls over. His elbow jabs your ribs. You close your eyes and try to think of something pleasant. Like soup. Real soup. The kind with meat. Sleep doesn't come easy. The wind howls outside, and the walls groan with the weight of snow. Someone farts loudly. The dog huffs. You roll over and try to muffle your face in the blanket, but that only makes it harder to breathe. You begin counting rats, not sheep, because you've seen 2 tonight already, and odds are there are more. They like the warmth of the fire, the crumbs in the straw, and the fact that you're too tired to care. Your grandmother starts humming a hymn in her sleep. You don't know the words, but the tune is oddly comforting. Or maybe it's just that she's still breathing. That's worth celebrating. There's a superstition you've heard, that if your feet are warm when you fall asleep, you'll survive till morning. You check your toes, still cold. You wiggle them like an apology to the universe. Back in the day, people often slept in shifts. The first sleep began shortly after dusk. Then came a period of quiet wakefulness, maybe an hour or 2, to stoke the fire, check on animals, or mutter prayers. Then came second sleep. You're in your first sleep now, or trying to be. If you're lucky, you'll wake up for your intermission and find all your fingers still attached. The air turns colder just before dawn. That's when it bites deepest. You tug the blanket over your head, creating a little pocket of warm breath that smells like cabbage and morning breath. A sudden loud snore from the neighbour startles you. He sounds like a dying boar. You stare at the dark ceiling and wonder. You pull the blanket tighter and try to ignore the straw poking your ribs, the fleas exploring your scalp, and the general sense of being a bundled burrito of misery. And still, somehow, you drift off. Because exhaustion trumps comfort every time. When you wake, your nose is numb. Not just cold, unnumb, like it's been left out on a windowsill all night, which, considering the state of your drafty hut, might not be far from the truth. You take a cautious breath. The air is sharp, dry, and smells like burnt wood and stale bodies. The fire has gone out. Again. Of course. Your stomach growls in protest. That's not new. Hunger is your winter roommate, always lurking, always complaining. always asking if you maybe remembered a crust of something under your bed. You didn't. You sit up slowly, straw clinging to your back. The others are still asleep, or pretending to be, in that way where no one wants to face the morning yet. You crawl toward the hearth, poke at the ashes, and find them cold. Utterly and completely cold. Great. There's no fresh bread waiting, no smell of frying eggs or sweet rolls. Breakfast, if you get one, is hard, dry bread that you have to soften with water if you don't want to break a tooth. And let's be honest, you don't have dental insurance. You rummage through a cracked wooden box near the wall. It holds the family's winter pantry, which is a generous term for what's basically sadness in a crate. A turnip the size of a fist, some dried beans, a piece of salted fish that might be older than you, and bread, stale, greyish, and hard enough to qualify as a weapon. You break off a piece. It takes effort, and a dull thunk echoes through the room. You gnaw on it like a determined squirrel, pretending the frost that's crept in from the doorframe isn't kissing your ankles. Winter's not just about being cold. It's about being hungry in new and creative ways. The fields are dead. The hens barely lay. The cow's milk has slowed to a dribble. You're living off stores, what little could be dried, smoked, salted, or buried in a clay pot. And it's only January. Back in the fall you helped gather everything. Root vegetables, apples, grains. You dried what you could, hung herbs from the rafters, buried turnips in pits lined with straw. You even helped slaughter the pig and watch the meat get salted, hung and guarded like gold. That was the good part. Now, it's the long wait rationing, stretching and hoping the food outlasts the cold. You glance at your meal and sigh. Bread and beans again. It's like chewing on poverty. There's no coffee, no tea, just a cup of warm water, with maybe a mint leaf if you're feeling decadent, or ale, if someone was smart enough to brew a weak batch before the frost set in. But water, that's a mission. You slip outside with a clay jug in hand. The sky is a pale grey, and the world is crusted over in ice. Your boots crunch on frozen dirt as you make your way to the stream. It's nearby, but still far enough to be annoying, and each step sends tiny shivers up your legs. When you reach it, the stream is mostly frozen. You search for a thin patch, pull out the iron tip of your walking stick and start chipping away at the ice. It's loud and miserable work. Your fingers burn in your gloves, and a spray of frozen slush splashes your face. Finally you crack through. Water, ice cold and barely flowing beneath. You lower the jug carefully. Don't drop it. You've done that before, and the cursing still echoes in your memory. Once it's full, you cap it, wipe your nose on your sleeve, and trudge back. It's a miracle your ancestors didn't just roll over in the snow and give up. But then again, they were used to this. You're still mentally filing complaints to a medieval HR department that doesn't exist. Back at the hut, the others are awake. Your cousin eyes your jug like it contains ambrosia. You pass it around. Everyone sips, no one talks. You're all too busy pretending this is a normal morning and not a tiny personal apocalypse. You remember stories from the old folks how some years, the frost hit so hard the wine froze in the barrels and had to be chipped out with axes. Historians still argue whether that's exaggerated, but it's not hard to imagine. Not when the wash basin in the corner of your hut has a thin skin of ice over it. You go to break it. The water inside looks like it's been resting in peace for 3 days. You chip away a chunk to melt near the fire later, if you ever manage to relight it. On some days you dream about the monastery kitchens. They weren't warm, per se, but they had bread ovens and giant pots, and if you believed the rumours, actual butter. You're not asking for much, just something that doesn't crack your molars. You think about fasting, not the holy kind, though that's expected too, but the unintentional kind, the kind that comes from opening your pantry and seeing nothing but sadness. In better households, the lady of the manor might dole out food to the poor at the gate, if the manor had extra. Some villages had winter fairs, where extra turnips or salted fish were bartered. but that was rare, and most people just tightened their belts. Literally, belts were a fashion choice and a hunger gauge. You tear off another piece of bread, dunk it in water to soften it, and chew it slowly. It tastes like cardboard soaked in regret. Still, it fills your stomach just enough to silence it for a few hours. Even the children have stopped asking for more. They've learned. Food is rationed by age, by strength, by silence. Crying doesn't get you fed faster. It just earns you a tired glance and a smaller share. Sometimes you wonder how the nobles lived during winter. Probably better, with roast meat, mulled wine, and servants stoking every hearth. But even castles were draughty. Cold is the great equalizer. Rich or poor, you're still wrapping yourself in whatever you can find and hoping your toes don't turn black. You think of stories whispered by firelight, of families too proud to beg, wasting away behind heavy wooden doors, of bakeries robbed, of strangers found dead in ditches, still clutching sacks of flour. And somehow, that makes this bread, this horrible, tasteless, half-frozen crust, a feast. You eat the last bite, chase it with a mouthful of water, and force a smile. It's not much, but it's something. You rub your hands together, trying to summon friction like some kind of desperate wizard. They're red, chapped, and raw. The kind of raw where every flex feels like cracking thin ice. You're not sure if it's the cold or the endless water factoring, but either way, your skin has officially declared war. And yet, you need more water. Always more. Not just to drink, but to wash dishes. Well, a dish, and to keep the animals alive. You brace yourself and step outside again, this time with a wooden bucket, and a prayer that the ice hasn't thickened too much since this morning. The sun's hanging low, even though it's barely midday. Everything's silver with frost. Fence posts look like they've been dipped in sugar. It'd be beautiful, if it wasn't so deadly. You walk to the stream, carefully avoiding patches of ice, with the cautious shuffle of someone who's seen a cousin fall and knock out 3 teeth last winter. The memory of that cracked skull or ice you never figured out still echoes in your brain. At the stream's edge you crouch, your knees popping like old wood. The ice is thicker now. You chip at it again, your hands starting to shake. Water sloshes slowly under the surface, a reluctant river. You lower the bucket, coaxing it down so the cold doesn't shock your fingers straight into a cramp. Then up again, heavy, freezing, slopping slightly over the edge and onto your already damp boots. Fantastic. You hurry back, shoulders hunched. The wind slaps you for daring to leave shelter. Your breath puffs out in little clouds that instantly freeze the edge of your hood. You've stopped checking your reflection in water. It's just too bleak. When you get inside, someone's boiling a tiny pot of something. Probably more water. Maybe for washing clothes. Maybe for making broth out of a carrot and ambition. Either way, the steam fogs the air and brings a flicker of warmth, until it disappears and you're left with cold, wet floors again. You set the bucket down and flex your fingers. The pain is real. Not sharp, but a dull, tired ache, like your bones are bored of your survival attempts. Water is life, but in winter it's also a death trap. Streams freeze, wells freeze, and what doesn't freeze becomes sludge. Getting a clean drink is a daily struggle. And don't get fancy ideas. Boiling it isn't always an option. Firewood is scarce. Every log you burn for water is one less to warm your toes. It's always a bargain with nature. Warmth or sanitation, never both. If you remember, someone once told you that people in winter used to melt snow and drink that. You tried it once. It tasted like cold disappointment. Also, it took forever. 10 minutes to gather enough, 30 minutes to melt it. 2 minutes to spill half of it on your foot. Plus, you're not entirely sure which dog peed on that patch. You hear a crash outside. Your heart jumps. You rush to the door and peek out. Just a bucket, fallen from its perch on the wall. But still, you don't relax. Not until you're back inside with the door shut, bracing it with a wooden wedge that's more optimism than security. There's something strange about water in winter. You need it constantly, but it's never easy to get. People used to die trying. Historians still argue whether more people perished from thirst illness or from falling through thin ice trying to avoid it. Either way, the result's the same. Cold, silent, and very, very final. You sit down and look at your hands again. They're red, the knuckles cracked open in a few spots. You flex them, wince. Then grab the washcloth and start wiping down the table. It's one of those tasks you do just to stay warm. But washing anything is a joke in this weather. The water chills your fingers instantly, and the cloth freezes if you leave it out too long. You wash quickly, half-heartedly, before deciding it's clean enough. Dirt can wait until spring. You hear someone grumble behind you. The old man in the corner is muttering about the well, how it's deeper than it used to be, harder to draw from. He says the rope's frozen stiff and the pulley snapped last week. Someone's going to have to fix it, but no one wants to lose a toe for it. You nod solemnly. Wells are temperamental in winter. The lid freezes shut. The bucket rope gets brittle. The edges ice over, making every step a potential slapstick disaster. You've seen grown men land flat on their backs with a jug flying skyward like a misguided comet. In some towns, they used to build little shelters over wells, trying to keep the worst of the frost out. Rich folks, of course. You don't have that luxury. You've got a hole in the ground and a short prayer. A memory comes to mind. Someone once dropped their bucket into the well midwinter. Gone. Just plonk, and no way to retrieve it. They tried lowering a hook. Nothing. That family spent the rest of the season scooping water with their hands and tears. You blink. Shake it off. You've got your bucket. For now. Don't jinx it. There's a debate going on now between two women near the fire. They're arguing about how their ancestors dealt with water. One swears her grandmother boiled snow. The other claims snow's too clean to trust, whatever that means. You tune it out, not because it's boring, but because your brain's trying to reserve energy. Thinking too hard feels expensive right now. You check the pot, still bubbling. You hover your hands above it, not close enough to burn, but close enough to pretend. Steam curls around your fingers, and for a brief second, you're almost warm. You close your eyes. You imagine summer, a stream you can step into without screaming, a jug of cool water that doesn't smell like iron or regret. You remember that once, someone tossed water at you during a midsummer festival, and you were annoyed. Now, you'd pay in blood for that splash. A child sneezes. You open your eyes. Cold reality seeps back in. You pour some of the heated water into a cup. Sip carefully. It burns your cracked lips, and you love it for that. You'll ration the rest. Maybe wash a rag. Maybe offer someone else a sip, if you're feeling generous. But mostly, you'll sit and guard it like treasure. Because in a medieval winter, hot water isn't just comfort. It's a miracle. The sun doesn't rise so much as yawn behind a veil of clouds. You look outside and sigh. It's barely noon, but the light is already draining from the sky like someone pulled the plug. Everything's grey. Not in a poetic way, just in a the world forgot to wake up sort of way. Winter daylight is a cruel trick. It shows up late, leaves early, and doesn't do much while it's here. You're stuck in twilight most of the time, squinting through shadows, wondering if it's time to eat, sleep, or pretend to do chores. Spoiler, it's never time to relax. Inside the hut, the candle stubs are already burning, even though there's still enough outside light to stumble by. But no one's willing to trip over a goat for the sake of ambience. Besides, candles are precious. Made from tallow or beeswax if you're rich, tallow if you're not, which you are most definitely not. It smells like meat gone slightly wrong, but you're used to it. You've probably smelt worse on yourself. You try to track time, but winter doesn't care about your schedule. Without a proper clock, because you lived centuries before those are common, you go by sun, shadows, and gut instinct. None of them are particularly reliable in a week-long fog. Some monks were obsessed with timekeeping, of course. They rang bells for prayers like it was their job. Because, well, it was. Matins, Lauds, Prime, all the way to Compline. But for you, the only bells you hear are in your stomach. You'd happily sleep through Lauds if it meant a warm blanket and an uninterrupted dream about stew. You light a rushlight, basically a stalk of reed dipped in animal fat. It hisses and flickers with a mean little flame. The room goes from nearly dark to dim and disappointing. You squint around. It's hard to tell what time it is, but everyone's moving like it's bedtime, even though it isn't. That's what winter does. Makes everyone walk around like they're half asleep and mildly betrayed. You glance out the door again. The sky's a dull silver. No colour, no movement. Just clouds layered like wet wool. You think you see a bit of blue in the distance, but then it's gone, swallowed up by another round of gloom. Back in the hut, the fire's burning again. Barely. Someone must have coaxed it back to life with the last of the good wood. It doesn't offer heat, so much as the idea of heat. You sit close, your back to the wall, and stare at the flickering light. Even light behaves differently in winter. It's weaker. Sadder. It bends around corners like it's apologizing for being late. You start thinking weird thoughts, like, what if time is just frozen, and we're all walking through soup? You shake your head. Nope. Too philosophical for someone who hasn't pooped comfortably in weeks. You focus on the fire instead. Time stretches in winter. Minutes feel like hours, and afternoons feel like days. You could swear it was just lunchtime, and yet it's already dusk. Again. There was something about this slow fade of light that makes your bones feel older. You feel it in your back, your knees, the part of your soul that used to believe in sunshine. In warmer seasons, the days had rhythm: wake with the sun, work the fields, sweat until your shirt glued itself to your back, then crash at night with a belly full of barley. But now, you just sort of exist. Shuffle, eat when there's food, sleep when you're too tired to argue with your own spine. The days blur together. You don't remember if it's Tuesday or St. Agnes Day. Even the animals are confused. The rooster crows at odd hours. The goat looks at you like she's judging your life choices. Outside, the shadows are deepening. You glance up and spot a thin crescent moon trying to peek through the clouds. It gives up halfway. Can't blame it. Some folks in the village used to track moon phases religiously. They believed certain nights were cursed, that you shouldn't leave the house when the moon's just a sliver. That's when the spirits slip through. Your aunt used to whisper. You laughed, once. Then you heard a howl in the woods at midnight and stopped laughing. Scholars still debate how much medieval folk believed in moon magic, but belief is a strange thing in winter. When everything's cold, and the sky forgets to shine, you start whispering to whatever gods, spirits, or glowing rocks might listen. Back inside, someone lights another candle. It costs too much, but what else are you going to do, sit in total darkness and wait for spring? You remember hearing once that some people used to paint their homes white inside, to reflect light better. Must be nice to have paint. Your walls are brown, mud-streaked, and occasionally mouldy. You consider painting them with your thoughts. Doesn't work. Another hour passes. Or maybe just 15 minutes. Hard to tell. Time's doing that stretchy, lazy winter thing again. You step outside once more, wrapped in every piece of will you own. The air hits you like a slap sharp and immediate. You see your breath thick and slow. You look up. No stars. Just endless grey. You take a few steps down the path. Your boots crunch through a thin skin of frost. You stop by the water trough. It's frozen solid. Again. You tap it with your knuckle, solid as a bishop's conscience. Suddenly a distant bell rings, faint, muffled by snow and space. It's from the abbey. They're still keeping time, those poor frozen monks. You imagine them in their cells, wrapped in habits, lighting incense, chanting prayers in the dark. You nod in their direction. Respect. They're surviving winter with no heat, no talking, and a diet of boiled humility. You shuffle back inside and sit down, letting your legs thaw one ache at a time. The candle's burning low now. It flickers and throws long, dancing shadows on the wall. One shadow looks like a wolf. You blink. It's just the stool. Someone begins singing softly. A lullaby. You don't know the words, but you recognize the melody. You lean your head back against the wall and let your eyes close. There's no sense of time here, just cold, flickering light and the long, slow breath of the house as it creaks and settles around you. And in the strange, endless dusk of winter, that's all there is. A cough cracks the silence like a branch snapping under ice. You jolt a little, head still fuzzy from the half-sleep you drifted into against the wall. It's the old woman in the corner again. Her cough's deep, wet and starting to sound like it has intentions. You know what that means. Everyone does. The plague doesn't take the winter off. If anything, it seems to like the cold. Close quarters, bad air, fewer open windows. It's the perfect storm. People huddle together to stay warm, breathe the same smoky air, pass around food, blankets, and germs like they're trading cards. You shuffle to your feet and cross the room to fetch her a cup of warm water. It's the kindest thing you can do. That, and pretend you didn't notice the red tint when she wiped her mouth earlier. She takes the cup with shaking hands. Her fingers are thin, cracked, and veiny. You sit with her for a minute, feeling your own stomach churn, not from sickness, but from a creeping fear. You've seen this before. So has everyone. You don't have to say the word. Pestilence. The church calls it divine punishment. The village healer says it's bad humours. You think it's probably that other kid who coughed in your face last week. Either way, it spreads. Fast. There's a strange irony here. You'd think the cold would kill germs. But it turns out, germs love a good party when everyone's trapped indoors. You cough once. Just dust, you think, but now you're watching your own breath for signs of betrayal. You remember stories of the Black Death, how it swept through in waves. 1347, then again and again like a bad chorus. Historians still argue whether those later outbreaks were the same disease or mutated cousins. Doesn't matter. Sick was sick, and winter made it worse. The most famous plague years hit in warmer seasons, sure, but sickness in winter was a different beast. Less explosive, more lingering. Coughs that turned to rattles, fevers that burned under layers of blankets, and no windows open to let anything out. Just stale, smoky air, trapped with you like a slow-moving storm cloud. Your hut smells like wet wool, garlic, and dread. Someone nearby has tied herbs in bundles and hung them over the doorway. Supposed to purify the air. Supposed to drive away the bad spirits. You want to believe it. You really do. But the coughs keep coming. They say the Danes once wore garlic around their necks to fend off plague. You've tried that. All it did was attract the neighbour's dog. Another tip was to burn sweet-smelling things, juniper, rosemary, pine cones. You tried that too. All it did was make the smoke even smokier. A child sneezes near the fire. You flinch. Then you feel terrible for flinching. But it's instinct now. The winter has trained you well. You look at your hands. They're clean-ish, as clean as they get here. You dunk them in a bowl of water with some herbs steeped in it, something the midwife gave you. It smells like basil and swamp. You pretend it's helping. Sickness travels quietly. A touch here, a cough there. You try not to share spoons, try not to drink from the same cup. But in the dark, in the cold, with food running out and firewood low, everyone makes compromises. You remember when the smith's wife died last year. She'd seemed fine, until she wasn't. Fever one night, gone the next morning. No funeral, just a quick burial in frozen ground. No one even wanted to carry her. She was the first, but not the last. You've heard whispers that whole families have died overnight. Doors bolted from the outside. no one brave enough to knock. You glance at the door now. Just wood and a bit of cloth wedged into the frame. Not much of a defense, but enough to make you feel like you're doing something. And the healers? They do what they can, which isn't much. Poultices, leeches, whispered prayers, maybe a charm tucked into your tunic. But there's no medicine, no cure, just time and luck. Some people swear by dried frog powder. Others boil moss scraped off gravestones. A few desperate souls drink their own urine because someone once said it balances the humours. You've never gone that far, yet. There's also the bleeding. Don't even get started on the bleeding. One wrong poke, and you're weaker than the disease itself. You once saw a man faint after having 2 leeches removed from behind his ears. He claimed he felt lighter. He also hit his head on a bench and didn't wake up for 2 days. So, some monks wrote about a practice called bloodletting by season. Supposedly you bleed more in winter to warm the body. You think maybe they just wanted an excuse to do something, anything, when helplessness set in. You know someone who tried to ward off winter sickness by wrapping themselves in red cloth. Red keeps the death away, she said. You haven't seen her since. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't. Even the rich weren't immune. Sure, they had more space, cleaner clothes, less flea traffic. But when the wind brought disease, no wall was high enough. You remember hearing that Queen Eleanor once spent entire winters in one room just to avoid bad air. You wish you had that kind of isolation. But you don't. You sit with your back to the wall and count the number of coughs in the room. 3, then 4, then 1 from yourself. You tell yourself it's just dry air. Not the plague. Not this time. There's a strange quiet in the air. Not peace, just the kind of stillness that happens when everyone's too tired or too scared to talk. It settles into your bones like the cold. Outside, snow starts to fall again. You watch it through the gaps in the wall, flakes drifting down like ash. The world is so still, so white, so deceptively peaceful. Inside, a new cough starts. A wet one. You swallow hard. You won't look. Not yet. You've put it off as long as you can, but eventually nature calls, loudly, relentlessly. And unfortunately, medieval plumbing is about as advanced as your straw mattress. There's no chamber pot in sight, and even if there were, you know it would already be full. Everyone in the house has been tiptoeing around the same ceramic time bomb for days, waiting for someone else to be the brave soul who empties it. Spoiler, that person is never you. So it's time to do the unthinkable, the midlife pilgrimage, the long walk. You sigh, wrap your cloak tight around your shoulders, and stuff your feet into your still damp boots. Instantly, the chill hits like a personal insult. The leather's stiff with frost. Your toes curl in protest. The door creaks open, and a wall of cold air slaps you across the face like you owe it money. You step outside, breath coming out in sharp little clouds. You try not to think about how dark it is, or how far the communal pit is, or what you might step in along the way. The outhouse, or, more accurately, the designated human shame trench, is about 30 paces from the hut. 30 slippery, muddy, sometimes icy steps across uneven ground, past sleeping animals and other people's regrets. Your eyes adjust to the dark. Moonlight helps a little. A dim silver glow spills over the rooftops and the snow, making everything look strangely peaceful, until you realize you're squinting at a frozen pile of what was very definitely someone's dinner 2 nights ago. Lovely. You shuffle forward, each footstep a gamble. The earth underfoot crunches and squeaks. You imagine falling, how the cold would seep into your back, how the snow would melt against your skin, how your bladder would give up all dignity. It's a terrifying thought. At last, the latrine. It's little more than a wooden box perched over a pit. The door hangs slightly askew. You duck inside and instantly regret it. The smell. Oh, the smell. If you could bottle it, you'd have the perfect weapon for siege warfare. It's the kind of scent that physically slaps you, crawls into your lungs, and clings to your clothes like betrayal. Your eyes water, your stomach lurches. You begin to question all your life choices. Inside, it's too dark to see much, and that's a blessing. You've been here before. You know the drill. Balance carefully. Do not drop anything. Do not slip. Do not linger. You finish your business with the speed of someone being chased by an invisible beast, and you stumble back outside, gasping for fresh air like you've just escaped a dungeon. Which, in a way, you have. You brace against the wind and hurry back toward the hut, but you hear something behind you. A rustle. A low crunch of snow. You freeze, not from the cold, but from dread. Wolves. Could be. They've been bold lately. Hunger makes even the shy ones desperate. You don't turn around. You don't breathe. You just listen. Another sound. Just a branch. Or a footstep. You walk faster. Wolves were a real threat during the medieval winter, especially when food was scarce. Packs would linger near villages, watching, waiting, sometimes snatching animals or worse. There are stories, whispered ones, of children disappearing, of lone travellers found with claw marks instead of answers. Historians still argue whether the wolf threat was as constant as legends claim, or just a symbol of the general danger. But right now, you don't care about debates. You just want to be inside. You reach the door and fumble with the latch. Your hands are numb and clumsy. The door creaks open, and you dive in, slamming it shut behind you. Your heart thuds. You wait. Silence. You're probably fine. Probably. You peel off your cloak, your boots, and try to stop shivering. The others glance at you, silently judging your timing. No one asks what you saw. They know that look. Everyone's made the walk at some point. Everyone's heard the rustling. There are no bathrooms indoors. No privacy. Just a bucket if you're desperate and brave. You've used it before, but only when the snowstorm was so thick you couldn't find the door. And there's the ever-horrible reality of cleaning the bucket. Someone has to. Someone always has to. That someone is always the youngest, or the slowest, or the one who lost a bet. You've done it. You've seen things, smelled things. You've been changed. In noble houses they had garderobes, basically stone seats built into castle walls, with holes leading straight outside. Fancy, right? Except in winter, the cold wind would whip straight up through those holes like a ghost with a grudge. Some castles even suspended their latrines over rivers. Clever, unless the river froze and created a horrifying poop sculpture for all to admire. You sit by the fire again, still trying to shake the chill from your bones. Your breath still fogs the air in front of your face. You haven't stopped shivering since you opened the door. There's a joke someone once told you. You know it's a good winter when you don't cry on the latrine. Because the tears freeze. Get it? Ha. You hear someone dragging the chamber pot across the floor. It sloshes. You look away. The sound is enough to ruin your appetite. Not that you have one. Someone else heads out next. You don't envy them. You don't speak. Just give them a small, pitying nod. The latrine walk bonds people in a way few things do. It's a shared humiliation, a nightly test of courage, a frigid reminder that civilization is still centuries away from heated toilet seats. And still, you'll do it again. Because what's the alternative? Exactly. You lie back down on the straw bed, pulling the blanket over your nose. The warmth is minimal, but at least the smell's better in here. You close your eyes, hoping to sleep before the next bladder betrayal drags you back out into the cold. And if you dream tonight, may it be of plumbing. Blessed, blessed plumbing. Morning doesn't arrive so much as creep in through the cracks, like a hungover guest unsure if it's welcome. The light is dull and bluish, and you open your eyes to a room that looks exactly as it did when you closed them. Grey, smoky, damp. Time doesn't feel linear anymore. It's just a cold loop. You stretch, or try to. Your joints protest, stiff as dried leather. Your blanket, which isn't so much a blanket as a glorified potato sack, is tangled around your legs. Someone's foot is in your back. You shove it off without ceremony. You scratch your side, then your neck, then your leg. The itch is constant now, low and maddening, like your skin is trying to escape. You know what this means. Lice. You sit up and run your fingers through your hair. A few white specks drop onto your lap, like tiny traitors. You grimace. Not again. You reach for your tunic. It's the same one you wore yesterday, and the day before, and let's be honest, probably since the Feast of St. Martin. It smells like fire, sweat, and quiet suffering. You shake it out, but the lice don't seem to notice or care. You pull it on anyway, because that's the wardrobe. You've got exactly 3 tunics, one for work, one for sleep, and one that's technically reserved for mass but now just hangs limply from a beam because it got chewed on by a mouse. Your cloak is still damp from yesterday's outing to the latrine. You drape it over your shoulders and brace yourself for the morning's worst task. Boot time. Your boots are stiff, cracked, and fur-lined with something that might once have been fur. Now it's just a matted mystery. You slide your foot in, feel the chill wrap around your toes like a cruel handshake, and start walking before your brain can register the full regret. You stomp around the hut for a bit, trying to wake up your limbs and maybe knock off a few fleas. They jump ship occasionally onto the dog, onto your bed, onto other humans. It's a rotating infestation. No one's safe. Someone once told you that medieval folks didn't mind lice because everyone had them. Well, maybe they didn't mind in theory. But you do. You mind deeply. You mind every bite, every itch, every tiny little invasion. You remember seeing a woman in the village sit for hours picking lice out of her child's hair and cracking them between her fingernails like she was shelling peas. Efficient, horrifying, somehow comforting. Historians still argue whether medieval people really understood lice as pests, or simply accepted them as part of the furniture. Either way, they're here now, and they're throwing a party on your scalp. You step outside to shake out your cloak and tunic. The wind hits you like a slap. You grit your teeth and keep shaking. Flecks of straw, dust, and maybe the ghosts of 2 or 3 lice drift into the morning air. The sky is a flat sheet of pewter. No sun. Just grey. Again. You trudge back inside and grab a comb. Not a nice one. Just a flat piece of bone with teeth that seem custom designed to snag on everything except lice. You run it through your hair anyway, more out of habit than hope. Someone offers you ashes, from the fire, to rub into your scalp. You've done it before. Doesn't work. Just makes you look prematurely ancient. But they say it dries out the little buggers. Sure, so does starvation. Yet here we are. You sit by the hearth and check your sleeves. More lice. They like seams and cuffs. You pick a few off and flick them into the fire. That part's satisfying. You watch them shrivel with a hiss and mutter. 1 down, 500 to go. Cleanliness is a luxury you just don't have in winter. Baths are a summer thing, or a springtime thing, if you're feeling brave. In winter, the idea of stripping down and dunking yourself in cold water is enough to make your bones file a complaint. If you're rich, maybe you've got a tub inside, and a servant to heat water over the fire and pour it for you. But even nobles didn't bathe often in winter. It was considered risky. Opens the pores, they said. Makes you vulnerable to disease. So you wipe yourself with a damp rag and call it good enough. You scrub your armpits, your face, behind your ears. You sniff, regret it, but hey, at least you tried. Your clothes are layered and stiff. You've got your linen under tunic, your wool over tunic, and maybe a belt made of old rope. Nothing soft, nothing fits, everything itches. You remember someone once telling you that Vikings used to bathe once a week. Once a week. You dream of being that clean, that scented, that confident. Instead, you share body heat and parasites with half your family. There's a certain closeness that comes from sharing fleas, a resigned intimacy. You scratch your thigh. Again, you're not even subtle about it anymore. A child walks by and you spot a flea hopping on their collar. You consider saying something. Then you remember, it's not news. It's Tuesday. The fire pops, and you toss in a lice-bitten scrap of fabric that no longer serves a purpose. A few singed bugs crawl out before curling up and turning to ash. You almost cheer. Then you scratch again, and the war continues. You've always imagined castles as cosy, fireplaces roaring in every chamber, long tables piled with food, soft furs draped over velvet cushions. Warmth, luxury, safety, all the things your freezing hut doesn't offer. Then you visited one, once, and you've never been the same. Turns out, stone doesn't warm up. It just remembers the cold and makes sure you do too. You could light a dozen fires in a castle, and it'd still feel like you were living inside an exceptionally well-decorated cave. Even now, crouched beside your own sad hearth, you think about that visit. You were delivering firewood for the steward, got let inside the kitchen wing, where a maid handed you a scrap of bread and told you not to drip on the floor. You remember marvelling at the towering ceilings, the wide, echoing halls, and the way your breath was still visible indoors. You couldn't feel your toes the whole time. The walls were thick enough to stop an army, but they also trapped the cold. Those stone blocks, tightly fitted and sealed, had no give. No warmth. You leaned against one and flinched. It was like pressing your face to a glacier. The noblewoman who passed you wore 6 layers and still looked miserable, her nose red, her cheeks blotchy, her slippers barely making a sound on the frozen flagstones. You were jealous of her jewellery until she coughed into a lace handkerchief and whispered to her maid that the ink in her chamber had frozen solid again. Yeah, ink, frozen. Historians still argue whether that story's been exaggerated for effect, but after what you saw, you believe it. Back in your hut, you try not to laugh. All these years, you thought castles were heated by magic. Turns out, they're just fancier iceboxes with better ceilings. Sure, castles had fireplaces, sometimes huge ones, but most were in the great hall or the kitchen. Individual rooms didn't always have their own hearth. If you were lucky, you had a brazier, a metal bowl with hot coals that smoked you into submission before it warmed your toes. And forget about insulation. Those heavy tapestries on the walls weren't just for decoration. They were survival gear. Giant wool blankets nailed to the walls to keep the drafts from slapping noble necks. Didn't always work. You sit cross-legged now and scratch your head, thinking about all the things nobles had that still couldn't save them from winter's bite. Furs, yes, piled high. Wolf, bear, rabbit, you name it. The rich swaddle themselves in pelts like half-cooked sausages, but furs are heavy, and if they get wet, they smell like despair. You once wore a goat pelt to a winter feast, smelled like old cheese and bad decisions. Never again. Feathers? Also yes. Feather mattresses and coverlets. If you were wealthy enough, you sank into a bed so deep it could hide your shame. But again, those only helped if the fire in your chamber stayed lit all night, which it usually didn't. One of the steward's sons told you they sometimes brought in heated stones, big river rocks, warmed by fire, wrapped in cloth, then tucked into beds. Sounded lovely, until he mentioned that one of them once caught the bedding on fire and nearly roasted his aunt. So much for comfort. Another time you overheard 2 knights complaining that their armour had frozen in the armoury. Literally frozen. They had to thaw it with a brazier before they could get dressed. Imagine gearing up to fight while your chainmail feels like a steel popsicle. Good luck. And don't get started on the bathrooms. Most castles had garderobes. Those built-in toilet alcoves that emptied straight outside. Romantic, right? No. Wrong. They were freezing. You'd walk down a long, narrow hallway, usually with no window, no light, and the smell of 1,000 regrets hanging in the air. Then you'd squat over a stone bench with a hole in it and pray your rear didn't freeze to the seat. In some places they'd line the garderobe shaft with straw or throw herbs in to freshen it. You once heard of a noblewoman who slipped on the stone floor and fell halfway down. She was rescued. Eventually, they say she never smelled the same. You wrap your blanket tighter now, trying to imagine sleeping in one of those tall canopied beds. Curtains drawn, a maid tucking hot coals under the frame. Sounds lovely, right? Until you realised you'd still be cold. Just more cold, but surrounded by nicer things. There's a kind of equality in the cold. You and the nobility different lives, same shivers. They just have fancier mittens. Even kings complained. King Henry II supposedly had fires burning in every room of his palace in the winter of 1249, and still wore a fur-lined robe that trailed behind him like a pet. Of course, they had more options. They could flee south to warmer climates, or demand hot wine, blankets, foot warmers, and 10 servants to chase away the chill. You're lucky if your blanket doesn't have a hole chewed in it. You rub your hands over the fire again, and the memory of that stone castle lingers. The echo of boots on cold floors. The glint of frost on windows that cost more than your entire home. And still, despite everything, you're weirdly grateful you're here. Because at least your fire is your own. You can stretch out near it, swear at it, feed it, sleep beside it. No steward watching, no guard barking orders, no carved lion statue staring down from the walls like they're judging your posture. Your home may be smaller than a noble's dressing room. Your walls may be held together by hope and horse dung. But you know every creak, every crack, every inch that doesn't drip. And the cold, as much as it hates you, is familiar. You've learned its rhythms, its tricks, the way it slips through gaps when you're not looking, the way it lets up just enough to give you hope, then slaps you back into place. You think about that noblewoman again, the one with frozen ink and silk slippers. You wonder if she ever looked at her enormous fire and thought, still not enough. Probably. Because in a medieval winter, it never is. Someone knocks on the door. 3 soft taps, like they're not sure if it's worth disturbing anyone. You glance up, startled. No one knocks around here. Not unless it's urgent. Or weird. Or both. The latch lifts, and in steps a boy, cheeks red from the wind, hands wrapped in cloth. He's got that look. The mix of frostbite, nervousness, and too much information. He blurts out, "The Ashfields are having their wedding feast today." You blink. Today? In this? Everyone in the hut looks up at once. Blankets shift, backs straighten, eyebrows raise. A winter wedding always turns heads. Not because people love love, but because weddings mean food, and warmth, and possibly wine, or at least broth with bits in it. You throw on your cloak, boots still half frozen from last night's bathroom escapade, and step outside. The village path is slick with packed snow, but people are already gathering. Bundled figures, muttering and shivering, trudging toward the Ashfields' longhouse. The winter wedding. You've seen a few. They're always strange, equal parts celebration and frostbite survival drill. Folks didn't always choose winter for weddings. It was inconvenient, cold, risky, but sometimes it was necessary. Dowries arranged, land transferred, debts resolved. And honestly, there wasn't much else going on in January. And there was something to be said for starting a new household while everything around you was dead or sleeping. Hope against the chill. A statement to the cold. We're not done yet. As you approach the longhouse, smoke curls from the chimney like a promise. You step inside and get hit with a blast of heat and humanity. The place is packed, noisy, chaotic. Candles flicker. A pot of stew bubbles on the hearth. There's even soft bread. You feel your knees weaken. You wedge yourself onto a bench next to someone's uncle and clutch a cup of thin ale. It's warm-ish. That's enough. The bride appears, cheeks flushed, cloak trimmed in squirrel fur. She looks proud and slightly terrified. The groom stands beside her, awkward in a borrowed tunic and boots 2 sizes too big. Everyone watches the ceremony through fogged-up eyes and scarves. A priest mutters blessings, barely audible over the fire's crackle, and a child crying in the corner. You lean over to the uncle beside you. "Why now?" you whisper. He shrugs. Her father wanted it done before the next snow, and the pig was ready. Ah yes, the pig. A whole pig, roasted overnight. You can smell it from where you sit. That rare scent of meat that isn't dried, salted, or regrettably chewy. The room's already tense with anticipation. People are pretending not to look, but every eye drifts toward the table where it rests, steaming and golden. Weddings weren't just about unions, they were events. Food was offered, sometimes grudgingly, to the community. Not out of generosity, but reputation. Skimp on a wedding feast and folks remember. You'd be hearing about your stingy turnips for years. The stew is ladled out first. You get a wooden bowl of thick broth with a few pieces of carrot and miracle of miracles meat. Actual meat. Chewable, savoury, slightly mysterious meat. You don't ask what kind. You just nod at the bowl like it's an old friend and start eating. Between mouthfuls, you watch the rituals unfold. After the vows, someone throws a sheepskin over the couple and guides them toward the corner bed. It's symbolic. Don't worry. They're not expected to, consummate anything while half the village is still spooning stew. A few elders begin to sing, something slow and droning. It's meant to bless the marriage, or confuse any spirits who might crash the party. You hume along. It's oddly calming. Winter weddings came with their own quirks. In some regions, people would bury a bit of the wedding bread under the floor to protect the home from famine. Others would hang dried herbs above the marriage bed to ward off sickness and infertility. You spot a sprig of rosemary over the Ashfield's door and nod. Classic move. Someone near the fire starts telling a tale about a wedding last year where the groom slipped on ice and broke his arm before the ceremony. Still married him, the storyteller says. Couldn't carry her over the threshold, though. Had to drag her with the other arm. The room erupts in laughter. You sip your ale and let the warmth creep back into your fingers. For a moment, you forget about the cold outside. The stew, the voices, the soft candlelight. It's all enough to make you feel, well, alive. Then someone opens the door. A blast of icy air whooshes in like a vengeful ghost. Everyone groans. A few curses are muttered. Someone slams it shut again, muttering about idiots and drafty thresholds. You finish your bowl and feel a rare fullness in your stomach, a different kind of warmth. You think, this is why people do this. Not for romance, for stew. A scholar once wrote that medieval winter weddings were an assertion of human continuity against the silence of the season. Sounds poetic, but really, it's just about getting people in a room with fire and food before they all give up and melt into the snow. The singing picks up, louder now. Someone's brought out a drum. The newlyweds are handed goblets. The groom toasts to his bride. She toasts to not freezing to death this year. Everyone cheers. You feel the vibration of laughter in your bones. It's real. It's warm. It's loud enough to chase the cold out, if only for a while. And even though you know you'll return to your drafty hut tonight, to your straw bed and smoky fire, for now, just now you are full. And that's rare enough to count as magic. The laughter fades, the music slows. One by one, guests peel themselves away from the longhouse like frozen bark from a tree. You step out too, clutching the remains of your cloak around your shoulders, stomach still heavy with stew and something resembling contentment. Cold smacks you immediately sharper now, deeper. Night has arrived fully, and with it comes a sky bruised purple, and a silence so complete it hums in your ears. The wind has died down, which almost makes the cold feel worse, like the world is holding its breath. You head home by moonlight, boots crunching over snow that glitters in a way that feels like a trap. Every now and then, you think you hear movement just beyond the trees. But that's normal. It's not the trees that scare you. Not really. It's what's in them. Wolves. You pause. Turn your head. That sound again. A low rustling. Branches, maybe. Or something watching. Wolves were a fact of life in winter. When food ran low, they came closer to the villages, testing the fences, prowling the roads. You once saw paw prints the size of tankards, just a few paces from the barn. Deep, perfect imprints leading nowhere good. And they were smart. They didn't rush in snarling. No, they waited, watched, found the weakest, the coldest, the one who lagged behind on the path. Which, right now, is you. You pick up the pace. In your village, stories about wolves get passed down like lullabies, except none of them are comforting. There's the one about a man who followed the full moon into the woods and came back limping, clothes shredded, never speaking again. Or the widow who found her chickens gone one morning and a single bloody paw print on the roof of the coop. How it got there, no one wants to guess. Historians still argue whether wolf attacks were as common as the records make them sound, or whether the fear itself became a kind of social folklore. But you don't have time for academic debates. You have goosebumps and very real feet on a very icy road. You glance up at the sky. Stars have punched through the clouds now. Bright, glittering, uncaring. The moon is round and high, casting just enough light to make the shadows scarier. You keep walking. Once, a hunter told you wolves move silently when they want to, that you won't hear them until it's too late. You nodded, then never slept properly again. Your hut comes into view. You exhale, half relieved, half paranoid. You reach for the door, and that's when you hear it. A howl. Far off, yes, but not far enough. It starts low, then climbs. A long, mournful wail that cuts through the stillness and wraps itself around your spine. You freeze. Not figuratively, actually freeze. Your breath catches. You count to 3, then 5, then 10. Then another howl answers. Closer. You fumble with the latch, push the door open and slam it behind you. The hut welcomes you with its usual chill and its usual smell. You don't care. You're inside. A few faces turn to you. You nod. Wolves. No one asks how close. They just nod too. One man gets up and checks the boards over the window. Another throws a log into the fire. Too early, but worth it. You sit down and exhale. Your heart still beating too fast. The old man in the corner starts talking. He always does when wolves are mentioned. When I was a boy, he says, they came right to the door, scratched at it like they were knocking, took our dog, then our goats. Never the cows. Cows were too much trouble, but they waited and watched. You've heard this story before, but you let him talk. Everyone does. It's part of the ritual now. Every village has its wolf tales. Yours just happens to have a man who delivers them like bedtime stories. If your bedtime was a cold pile of straw, and your story ended in teeth. Some believe wolves are more than wolves. Spirits, some say. Guardians, others. Or messengers from whatever lies beyond the forest. In certain regions, people used to hang wolf skulls on their doorposts to scare off the real thing, or to curry favour. You don't have a skull, just a broken latch and a heavy stick near the bed. Once, during a particularly bad winter, someone left a sacrificial goat tied to a post outside the village. It disappeared by dawn. No one talked about it afterward. No one asked where the goat came from. You scratch your arm. try to shake off the lingering sound of that howl. You tell yourself it was far away. You tell yourself it's nothing. Then you hear it again. Not a howl this time. A growl. Soft, low, close. You stare at the door. Silence. You wait. You strain your ears. Nothing. Someone gets up and bars the door with a heavy beam. You didn't even know it had a beam. Apparently someone added it last spring. Smart. You settle back down, heart thumping behind your ribs like a frantic drum. You wrap your blanket tighter and glance toward the fire. The flames are high now, casting long shadows on the walls. One shadow looks like ears. You blink. It's just a stool. Probably. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but all you hear is wind. And in it, maybe, just maybe, breathing. Morning arrives like a forgotten promise, dim, quiet, and covered in frost. You stretch under your blanket, spine creaking like an old door hinge. You didn't sleep well. Nobody did. The fire burned too low, the wind howled too loud, and the memory of those wolf howls still curls at the back of your mind like smoke you can't quite fan away. Today is a holy day. Not one of the big, famous ones, no grand procession or golden cross, but still sacred. Today you fast. Your stomach is already protesting, which feels unfair, since you barely ate yesterday, or the day before. You clutch your midsection like you're comforting a crying child, and slowly rise from your straw bed. The others are already up, quiet, moving with the kind of slowness that's half devotion, half fatigue. One woman ties a scarf around her head, another mutters a prayer while poking at the fire. The coals grumble back. No one's eating. That's the rule today. Winter fasting might sound pious, but truth be told, it's often just convenient. There's not much food anyway. The church calendar provides the perfect excuse to skip a meal, or 3, and call it virtue. Today's saint, whoever he was, probably never intended to be celebrated with hollow bellies and cold feet. But here you are. Bread? Not today. Ale? Only the weak stuff. Meat? Absolutely not. Not even fish, depending on how strict your priest is. You look toward the shelf where the dry beans sit, huddled together like prisoners. Not even those. You're not supposed to eat anything that makes the fast feel like a feast. So, today you'll chew on boiled nothing and pretend it tastes like repentance. You sit by the fire, clutching a cup of lukewarm water, and think about last week's feast day. Now that was a meal. Thick stews, roasted root vegetables, even a bit of goose if you were lucky, or clever with your trade. That was St. Hilary's Day, and people laughed, sang and blessed the hearth like spring was already arriving. Today is not that. You've learned to tell the difference between a fast chosen and a fast imposed. There's the kind you do with a candle lit, prayers whispered, maybe a bit of pride. And then there's the one where you eat half a turnip and call it dinner, because that's all you have left until the next cart from the manor. Historians still argue whether the fasting rules were actually enforced in small villages like yours, or if they were more guidelines, but you've seen the priests frown when someone chews on a sausage in plain. The day stretches long and uneventful. Chores are slow, conversations are hushed. It's not just the fast, it's the cold. It steals your thoughts, your energy, your humour. Everything takes longer in winter. Everything feels longer. At midday, someone rings the chapel bell. Not a real bell. It's a chunk of iron hanging from a beam, but the sound still cuts through the village like a knife through frozen butter. You trudge to the chapel with the others, snow crunching under your boots. Your breath hangs the air in short, sharp clouds. Inside, the chapel smells like damp wood and beeswax. Candles flicker, casting shadows on a stone-faced saint carved above the altar. The priest speaks in Latin. You nod along, understanding only fragments. Pauperes, orate, mortem, the usual grim greatest hits. You kneel, and the cold from the stone floor shoots straight into your knees, like divine punishment. You whisper your own prayer, not for salvation, but for something hot to eat tomorrow. After the service, no one lingers. You file out quietly, back into the grey day. The snow has started again, fine and powdery, the kind that finds its way into your sleeves and stays there. Back home, you sit again by the fire. Your stomach growls once, then goes silent. It's given up. You consider chewing on your belt. Not seriously. Probably. Somewhere outside you hear children laughing. That's a rare sound in winter, and it pulls you toward the window. You peek through a crack in the wood. They're chasing each other through the snow, faces red, scarves flying behind them. One throws a snowball, misses, and slips, landing with a theatrical groan. They're too young to feel the fast. Their hunger hasn't settled in yet. They think winter's a game, a challenge, a story they'll tell later with a grin. You remember being that age, building snowmen that looked like saints, sliding down frozen hills on stolen planks, trying to catch snowflakes on your tongue before your grandmother yelled at you for eating the sky. You smile, then it fades. You scratch your elbow, pull your blanket tighter. Try to focus on something other than the sound your stomach is making. Some families, if they can, will cheat. They'll warm broth so thin it counts as water, sprinkle in herbs and pretend it's holy. Others will break their fast after sunset, sneaking bits of smoked meat like children stealing sweets. But you wait. You wait because there's not much to sneak, and even if you did, what would you take? A spoonful of beans? A crust of bread hard enough to cut your gums? You close your eyes and think about spring, about the first green sprigs of something edible poking through the dirt, about eggs that don't taste like chalk, about a feast day that ends with dancing and drinking, not hollow silence and flatulence from boiled cabbage. Outside, the wind is picking up. You can hear it rattling the edges of the door. Another storm, maybe. You press your hands to your stomach and whisper, tomorrow. Just hold on until tomorrow. Because winter takes everything slowly, your warmth, your strength, your appetite, but it always leaves a little something behind. Hope or hunger. Sometimes both. It starts with a sharp sting in your toe. You ignore it at first. Maybe you slept on it funny. Maybe the cold's playing tricks again. You shift positions by the fire, rub your foot through the rough wool of your boot, and tell yourself it's nothing. But it isn't. By evening, that sting has turned into a steady, icy burn. Not the kind that fades with warmth, but the kind that gets worse the longer you try to warm it. You pull your boot off slowly, carefully, and peel away the ragged cloth you've been using as a sock. The toe underneath is not right. It's swollen, hard at the tip, and when you press it, just gently, it doesn't respond like it should. The colour is wrong too. Less flesh, more frost. A greyish blue that looks like it belongs to something long buried. Frostbite. You knew it would happen. Everyone talks about it, but no one thinks it'll be their toe. You saw it last winter, when the miller's son came in from the woods, sobbing and cradling his hand. 3 of his fingers turned black within days. The healer wrapped them in herbs, said prayers, and whispered something about the rot. He lost 2. The third just fell off. You stare at your toe. Flex it. Nothing. Not even a twitch. You wrap it back up, slowly, like you're tucking in a child you don't want to scare. People wear their missing digits like badges of honour here. Oh, that toe? Lost it during the deep snow of 31. This finger? Trapped it under a frozen plough. It's a grim sort of bragging. A way to say, yes, winter tried to kill me, but I walked away with 1 less toe and a better story. You remember the old woman who used to say, if your nose itches, scratch it. If it stops itching, run. She had no nose by the time you met her. Just a scarred patch where one used to be. Historians still argue whether people truly understood frostbite the way we do now, or whether they just accepted it as another cruel surprise from nature. But you don't need a lecture to understand this. Your body's turning against you, 1 inch at a time. You shift by the fire, pulling your cloak tighter, trying to thaw without doing damage. That's the real trick. Too much heat too fast and you risk blisters. Not enough heat and the dead skin starts to rot. It's a lose-lose. Someone across the hut sees your face and raises an eyebrow. You shake your head. Just cold. You lie. They nod. They know better, but they're not going to press. No one wants to talk about frostbite. It's like naming a curse. Say it out loud, and suddenly your fingers start tingling too. You glance at the others. Some are still bundled in their blankets. A child is weeping quietly, huddled beside a sibling, both wrapped in the same patched quilt. An old man near the door hasn't moved in hours. You wonder, can he still feel his toes? You stand and limp toward the fire. Each step is a test of willpower. You wince, trying not to show it. The hearth spits and sighs. Someone's added fresh kindling, and the flames rise a little higher. You stretch your foot toward it. Carefully, the warmth makes your skin scream, and your stomach churns. There's a smell in the room now. Something sour. Not strong, not obvious. Just the first trace of decay. You glance at your toe again and feel bile rise in your throat. People die from this. Not right away, not dramatically. They just get slower, sleepier. Infection sets in, then fever, then silence. There was a boy last winter who ignored the pain in his heel. By spring, they were burying him with no feet. You glance toward the shelf where the herbs are stored. Dried leaves, some bundled wool, a bowl with a sticky residue you're trying not to identify. Maybe there's something there to rub on the toe. Something to draw out the cold, or the pain, or the fear. You hobble over and dig through the pile. You find a little bundle of dried yarrow. Not much, but it's what the healer used last time someone swelled up. You crush it with your fingers, mix it with a bit of melted fat from the pot near the fire, and smear it on the toe. It stings. You exhale slowly. That's good, right? Pain means the toe's still alive. Probably. Somewhere outside, wind howls like a banshee. You imagine it laughing at you. You limp back to your spot by the fire and sit. Everyone's avoiding your gaze now. Not out of rudeness, but out of superstition. They don't want to see your toe, don't want to think about what might happen, because once the frost claims a piece of you, it doesn't let go. You shift again. The pain is dull now, settling in. In the corner, someone starts humming. Not a tune you know. Slow, quiet, like a lullaby for people with regrets. You lean your head back, try to focus on the rhythm, not the sting in your foot, not the heavy dread creeping up your leg like smoke. You close your eyes and wonder, how many toes does a person really need, anyway? You're dreaming, and in the dream, you're warm. It's spring, maybe summer. You're lying in grass so soft it feels like water, and there's sun, real sun, on your face. Then you wake up, and your nose is frozen. You're back in the hut, of course. The fire's burned down to tired embers. Your toe still throbs beneath the yarrow paste, and someone is arguing over firewood again. It always starts like this. A low grumble, a mutter about whose turn it was to chop more, a sharp accusation. Then the voice rises. Another one joins. The child starts crying. Again. Cabin fever. Not the kind you write poems about. The real kind. Too many bodies in one room. Too many days without light, and nowhere to go but back into each other's faces. It wears at you, slowly. The same voices, same smells, same sighs. You can't even go outside for air without risking frostbite or a wolf encounter. So you sit and stew. Someone drops a cup. It shatters. Not into pieces, just cracks. But it's enough. The woman who owns it yells. The man who dropped it shrugs. Another voice joins in. Everyone has an opinion. It's like the cold has found its way into your skull, and started chiseling away at your patience. You breathe in slowly, try to keep calm. You glance around the hut. Faces flushed, not from warmth, but from rage and frustration. You've seen it before. You've felt it before. That twitch in your fingers when someone chews too loud. That irrational hatred for the person who hums while they work. That wild desire to scream into a snowdrift. You're not alone. Historians still argue whether cabin fever in the Middle Ages was documented in the same way we understand it now. But you don't need a term for it. You just need to watch the look in your neighbour's eyes when someone borrows their gloves without asking. Last winter, a woman in the next village locked her entire family out of the hut. Just opened the door, shoved them out and barred it. They found her 3 days later, humming and feeding a bird she swore was a saint. The bird was dead, probably before she started singing. Everyone blamed the cold, or the devil, or both. Inside your hut, the bickering has boiled over. Someone accuses another of stealing firewood. A child defends their parent. A neighbour mumbles something about the spirits being angry. The old man in the corner mutters, "It's the air," then sneezes. You get up, hobble to the door. Your toe protests, but you don't care. You unlatch it and step outside. The cold slaps you again, of course. It always does. But at least it's silent. Still, beautiful in its own way. The snow gleams under moonlight, and your breath rises in white curls. You take 3 deep breaths. Inhale the quiet. Try not to think about how long it is until spring. Then, there it is, a sound. A soft chime. You frown. Where is that coming from? Another chime. Closer, almost like laughter. Not the joyful kind, the eerie kind. The kind you hear in stories told by candlelight, when the fire pops and someone claims they saw something just beyond the edge of the woods. You turn toward the forest. Nothing but trees and snow. Then the chime again. You step back inside. Not because you're scared, of course. Just cold. Definitely just cold. You rebar the door. Sit down. The argument has fizzled. People mumble apologies. Someone pokes at the fire. Then someone says it. "It's the curse," they whisper. Heads turn. You look at the speaker. A woman, mid-30s maybe, shadowed by her hood. They say when a winter goes too long and tempers rise too high, the woods wake up. Spirits come walking. Whispering. You smirk. Spirits don't need to whisper. We're loud enough. She doesn't laugh. They feed on anger, she says, on bitterness, on homes where love has frozen. You blink. The old man nods. I've heard that. We used to hang birch branches over the doors, keep the spirits out, keep the peace in. You glance toward the doorway. Just straw, no birch, no protection. You rub your hands together and stare into the fire. It's getting low again. No one speaks for a while. You all sit in silence, thinking about broken cups, frozen hearts, chimes in the woods. A child snuggles into their mother's lap. Someone offers a scrap of cloth to patch the cracked cup. The air softens. Maybe that's the trick. You keep the peace, or the woods come looking. You throw another stick on the fire. It crackles like applause. You lie back down, pull the blanket over your face. The cold is still there, sure, but the tension has eased. For now. And maybe tomorrow, if no one yells, the chime will stop. It's still dark when you wake. You'd hope the sun would be kinder today. Maybe rise early. Maybe cast a bit of gold through the cracks. But it's dragging its heels again. Typical. There's movement in the hut. Someone shuffles past you with careful steps, avoiding the creaky floorboard. You lift your head just enough to see a figure in brown robes, barefoot, shoulders hunched, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Brother Martin. The monk. You forgot he was even staying here. He showed up last week from the monastery just outside the village. Said his cell was flooded with snowmelt. Some freak leak in the stone roof, and the abbot sent him to wait it out among the laity. Just for a week or two," he'd said with that smile only monks have. Kind, quiet, probably hiding some spiritual trauma. He's been sleeping on the floor by the door ever since. Never complains, never eats much, and never speaks unless spoken to. But every morning, without fail, he wakes before everyone else, kneels beside the fire, and says his prayers. Silently. You watch him now. His breath fogs the air. His fingers fumble with a small wooden cross. He closes his eyes, lips moving without sound, mouthing Latin phrases older than the hut you're in. The fire behind him crackles softly, casting golden shadow over his weathered face. You wonder how he does it. No shoes, no warmth, no bed, just robes and faith. Monks live harder than you ever realized. You used to think they were spoiled, tucked away in stone halls, writing books and growing herbs. But Brother Martin told you once, over a bowl of watery barley, that winters in the monastery were worse than most. "Stone is colder than mud," he said, "and silence is a terrible companion when you're freezing." He wasn't wrong. In the monastery they don't speak during meals, don't joke around the fire, don't grumble when their fingers turn blue. They write, they pray, they endure. Historians still debate whether these strict routines were spiritual discipline or just well-disguised suffering. Either way, it makes you look at Brother Martin's frostbitten toes with something like awe. You remember when he showed you his cell slippers, just fabric stitched with rope. "Made them myself," he said proudly. You tried not to look horrified. They wouldn't last an hour outside. The silence in a monastery is different from your hut. Here, the silence is full of breathing and muttering and stomachs grumbling. There, it's so quiet you can hear the snow fall. You imagine sitting alone, wrapped in robes, watching frost creep up the inside of your walls while you try to copy psalms with numb fingers and ink that won't flow. Brother Martin doesn't speak of suffering. He speaks of offering. Every hardship, he says, is something to give. Cold, offer it. Hunger, offer it. Frostbite, definitely offer it. You tried that once. Whispered, "Here, take my cold, Lord," after your toes went numb. Nothing happened. Maybe you weren't holy enough. Or maybe the Lord was busy. You sit up, slowly, joints popping like twigs. Martin notices you and nods. He doesn't smile, just nods. A monk's version of good morning, sorry we're both dying slowly. He hands you a cup, warm. You take it. Sip, thin broth, monastic style. Tastes like hot water with ideas. Still, the warmth spreads through your chest like a memory of summer. You look around the hut. Everyone else is still asleep. The fire's flickering lazily. The straw crunches beneath your shift. And for a moment, it's just you and the monk. You ask him how they survive. He shrugs. We pray, we wait, we prepare for worse. Worse? You shiver. There's worse? He nods. Always worse, but never forever. You almost laugh, but something about his voice, low, steady, certain, keeps you quiet. He speaks like someone who's already seen the worst and lived to copy it out in perfect Latin calligraphy. Monks weren't always cloistered. Some travelled, cared for the sick, helped during harsh winters. Others just stayed inside, turning faith into ink and chores into rituals. Brother Martin's the latter, but winters dragged him out of hiding. You remember hearing that some monks slept on cold stone without blankets to imitate suffering. Others whipped themselves when they felt pride. You think about this while you add more firewood to the hearth and nearly cry from the joy of heat. You ask Martin why they do it. To remind ourselves that this isn't home. You blink. You stare into the fire, and suddenly something shifts in your chest. You don't quite understand it, but it settles there like an ember, glowing. Maybe that's what keeps monks alive in winter. Not their robes, not their ink, but the idea that this snow-covered purgatory isn't permanent, that there's something better beyond the frost. You sigh and sit beside him. He doesn't speak again. He just prays. And you, for the first time in days, close your eyes and whisper something too. You're not sure who it's for. Maybe yourself, maybe the wind. Or maybe just your poor toe. The hut creaks as the wind leans against it again, like it's testing your resolve. The fire spits half-hearted sparks, and someone across the room groans, half asleep, half suffering. You glance toward the corner where the youngest kids are bundled under layers of patched cloth and goat-smelling furs. They haven't moved in hours. That's either a good sign or a very bad one. You pull yourself up and limp over. There are 3 of them in that heap. The eldest is maybe 7. The youngest, barely 2. You crouch and listen for breathing. It's there, shallow, but steady. The oldest blinks up at you and offers a weak smile. You pat her head. Kids shouldn't have to do this. Not like this. Not here. They've learned things no child should know. How to wrap their feet before bed. How to tuck hot rocks under blankets. How to chew dried barley long enough to make it soft. And worst of all, how not to cry when they're cold. You've seen too many little ones with hollow eyes and blue lips. In a winter like this, childhood is something they grow out of too fast, like shoes they can't afford to replace. You remember when your sister lost her baby to the cold, just stopped breathing one morning, no warning. She wrapped him tighter the night before, swore he was fine, said he was just sleeping deeply. She rocked him for hours before she accepted what the silence meant. She didn't talk for weeks after that. The kids in your hut know these stories. They don't ask for them. They just absorb the tension in the room, the quiet panic when the wind howls, the adults huddled near the fire and whispering about the cough, the frostbite, the dwindling food. So they learn fast. How to keep socks dry. How to scrape frost off the inside of the door with a bit of bone. How to shake lice out of their tunics and pretend it's a game. Historians still argue whether medieval children were treated like small adults or treasured innocents. But here, in winter, there's no debate. They're survivors first, children second. You help the eldest to her feet. Her legs are thin, brittle like broom handles. She walks carefully, like she's afraid the floor might give way beneath her. You lead her to the fire. Someone hands her a bit of porridge, grey and lumpy, but warm. She eats slowly. She's learned not to waste a single bite. The younger 2 shuffle after her, blankets dragging behind like cloaks. You sit them down close to the fire and wrap them tighter. Their cheeks are red, snot crusted around their noses. They don't complain. Not once. You think about the old lullabies, the ones your grandmother used to hum, songs about brave mice and hungry moons, and the spring that always came eventually. You start to hum one now, just soft enough for the kids to hear. Their eyes flick toward you. They recognize it. The middle child leans into your leg, curling against you like a kitten. You keep humming, watching the fire. The tune floats above the crackling wood in the low, rhythmic breaths of the others. A few adults glance over. No one says anything, but one woman begins rocking a bundle in her arms, moving to the rhythm. Another adds a verse, quiet, cracked, beautiful in its own tired way. The kid's eyes begin to close. You keep humming. There's an old superstition in the village that singing near a fire keeps the spirits of cold at bay, that if you hum sweetly enough, the frost won't crawl into little lungs at night. It's nonsense, of course. But you sing anyway. You remember how people used to wrap infants in swaddle so tight they couldn't move, tighter than a chicken in a spit roast. Not just for warmth, but to keep their limbs straight. You always thought it was cruel. But now, watching a toddler doze off with arms pinned inside a fur cocoon, you understand. There's safety in stillness, You glance at the youngest. Her lips are a little pale. You pull her closer to the fire. Someone offers a cloth-wrapped stone, warmed by the coals, not too hot. You place it near her feet. She sighs in her sleep. The room is quiet again, not tense this time, just calm. Children bring that. A strange kind of strength, not because they fight back, but because they endure. They adapt. They survive. You remember hearing that some noble households kept nursemaids through the winter, just to make sure the kids didn't freeze at night. Not that it always worked. Even silk sheets and silver spoons couldn't guarantee survival. Winter doesn't care if you were born to a lady or a laundress. If you're small and soft, you're at risk. The monks used to take in orphans when things got bad. You once saw a whole wagon of frostbitten children brought to the abbey, wrapped in blankets, carried like offerings. Some survived, some didn't. The abbot wept for them all. You think of Brother Martin. He'd probably say every breath a child takes in winter is a little miracle. You look down at the kids curled against you, still breathing, still warm. You'll take that miracle. There's a strange sound in the dark. Snorting, hooves scraping against the floor, a wooden bucket being violently kicked over. You jolt awake, heart racing, blanket tangled around your legs. For a moment, you think it's a dream. But no. You blink the sleep out of your eyes and remember, with a wave of dread and exhaustion, the animals are inside again. They always are in deep winter. You swing your legs over the edge of your straw pile and stand slowly. The hut is dim, lit only by the dying glow of the hearth. You shuffle forward and stub your toe on something solid, round and stubborn. "Move, Greta," you mutter. Greta is the goat. She glares at you in the dark, chewing something she probably shouldn't be chewing. Her breath steams in the cold air. She flicks her ear and flops onto her side with the confidence of someone who pays rent. There's a chicken clucking somewhere under the bench. Another one is perched on the bench. The third is probably in the rafters again. You learned not to look up after last week's unfortunate dropping incident. The cow is in the corner, snoring. Yes, cows snore. Loudly. You never knew that until this winter. Now you know everything about the sleep patterns of livestock. More than you ever wanted to. There's a pig too, but he's mostly polite. Just lies there, snorting now and then, like he's bored with everyone else's drama. You step carefully over the goat and grab the water bucket, which has been knocked over again. You sigh. That was the last clean water. People often assumed that animals stayed outside in medieval times, tucked away in barns and stables. That's only partly true. When it got cold enough, really cold, they came in, right into the living space, into the homes, into your home. Because body heat is body heat, whether it moos, bleats, or clucks. It's less about love and more about survival. Animals provided warmth, company, sometimes early warnings of danger. The goat once bleated for 20 straight minutes before the back wall collapsed from heavy snow. She's been insufferably smug ever since. And sometimes, they were the backup food source. You try not to think about that too much. The kids are still asleep, curled under blankets and hay. The dog is near the fire, twitching in his sleep, probably dreaming of stealing cheese again. You crouch to mop up what little water you can salvage. The floor is cold and damp, the wood warped and stained. You think about how many generations have lived like this, sharing one space, one fire, one room with animals and everything else. Historians sometimes describe this living arrangement as the longhouse tradition. Man and beast under one roof, separated only by a low wall, or, in your case, a few wishful planks and a moral boundary that the pig doesn't respect. There's a weird comfort in the chaos, though. The cow radiates heat like a small furnace. The chickens keep your feet warm if you can convince them to stay still. The dog curls next to your leg like a smelly sock full of affection. Even the goat occasionally nudges your arm when she thinks you're sad. You lean against the wall and exhale. The hut smells like damp fur, hay and onions someone tried to boil 3 days ago. It's not pleasant, but it's yours. Still, the downsides are real. Chickens peck at your food. The cow sometimes lets out a fart so powerful it clears half the room. And fleas? They do not discriminate. You scratch your neck. Again. Someone once said that in winter, the only thing warmer than the fire is the pig. You believe it. He once fell asleep leaning against him, woke up drooling into his fur. He didn't even blink. The downside? He snores louder than the neighbour, and if he rolls over in his sleep, you either move or risk getting flattened. There's a strange kind of intimacy in all this. You know exactly when the cow needs to relieve herself. You know the goat's chewing rhythm. You can recognise which chicken is stomping around based on the sound of her claws on the floor. It's weird, and oddly domestic. You remember how the nobles used to scoff at the idea of animals in the house? Filthy, they'd say, undignified. Then build stables inside their castles for their prized falcons and hunting dogs. One baron supposedly let his favourite hound sleep on his feather mattress. It bit 2 servants and still got better treatment than the groom. So no, you don't feel shame. Just a little resignation. You step over a warm lump of something that is hopefully just hay. The goat tries to steal the sleeve of your tunic. You shove her away gently and crawl back toward your bedding. You lie down, careful not to wake the chickens. It's funny. You never thought your nights would end like this, curled up next to a dog, a goat blocking the door, chickens under the table, and the occasional snort from a dreaming pig. But here you are. You reach out and touch the dog's back. He shifts, then settles. There's a kind of rhythm to it now. A hum. A breath. People, animals, fire, cold. The strange symphony of a medieval winter night. And somewhere in the quiet, you feel it again. Not comfort, exactly, but something like it. Maybe it's warmth. Or maybe it's just the goat snuggling closer. The days are still short, but you've started to notice something. A shift. It's subtle, so small that if you weren't starving for change, you might miss it. But it's there. The sunlight, for one, lingers just a little longer in the afternoon. Not enough to be warm, but enough to notice the shape of shadows stretching across the snow instead of just vanishing into grey. The icicles hanging from the edge of the roof? A few of them drip now in the mid-morning hours. Just for a moment. Spring isn't here, but it's thinking about it. You step outside with a wooden pail, fully expecting the same slap of icy air. And it's cold, of course, but there's a softness to it. The breeze doesn't bite quite as deep. Your breath still fogs, but it doesn't hang in the air as long. A bird chirps. Just one. Just once. And it sounds insane. You look up at the sky. Still grey, still heavy, but lighter than before. Less like a coffin lid, more like a heavy blanket you might be able to push off if you tried hard enough. You walk toward the stream with something dangerously close to hope in your chest. The snow crunches differently beneath your boots. Wetter, slushier, more complaint, less crack. You slip once, curse the earth, and keep going. At the edge of the stream, the ice is thinner, fragile, even. You chip at it with your stick and see water gleaming beneath like a secret. It feels like a gift. You dunk the bucket and watch it fill with honest-to-goodness liquid. No cracking, no spilling, no hauling it back frozen solid, just water. You grin like an idiot. It's probably premature. You know this. Everyone knows this. False springs are notorious for lulling you into a sense of victory just before slamming you with another 2 weeks of howling wind and regret. But still, you carry the bucket home like a trophy. Inside, the hut is its usual chaotic blend of smells, smoke, and semi-conscious animals. The pig has moved closer to the fire, and is making a low whining noise in his sleep. The goat is chewing on something that might have once been a curtain. You don't ask. But even here, you can sense the difference. People are moving more. Someone's brushing out their cloak. Another is combing her hair for the first time in, well, you can't even remember. There's talk of checking the field, seeing if the snow's melted off the barley rows. It hasn't, of course, but just talking about it feels rebellious. You warm your hands on the fire and think about how close you are to making it. You count the days like a prisoner scratching marks into a wall. You remember the first night it snowed, the first time the fire went out, the first time you heard a wolf howl so close you could feel it in your teeth. You've survived all of that. Your toe still aches, but it hasn't blackened. Not yet. The swelling's gone down a little. The herbs must have helped. Or maybe your body just decided to keep that part of you after all. Generous. You glance at the kids in the corner. They're playing with bits of string now, inventing games, laughing too loud. The smallest one is wearing a hat made from someone's old mitten and pretending to be a spring witch. Her spell? Turning snow into soup. Ambitious. You let yourself laugh. Spring, when it comes, won't arrive like a sunrise. It'll creep in like a guilty cat. Slow, silent, with muddy paws, and the occasional dead thing in its mouth. But it will come. Eventually. That's what keeps you moving. Even when the nights are still long and the wind finds its way through every crack. Even when the food stores are down to a few onions, some crusts, and a cheese that smells increasingly suspicious. Even when the sun teases you for an hour, then hides for 3 days. You move. Because the thaw is coming. You know this in your bones, in the itch of your skin as the air grows less dry, in the way the goat kicked over the water bucket and didn't immediately freeze to it. Signs. Small ones. There's an old rhyme you hear in your head, the kind passed from grandmothers to children like shared bread. When the roof drips slow and the sky turns thin, the earth begins to wake within. If the raven calls before the thaw, be still, be wise, keep in your straw. But if the crow cries after noon, pack your cloak from come soon. You chuckle. You haven't heard either bird in weeks, but the rhyme's nice, feels like a promise in a world that keeps forgetting to make them. Someone calls for you to help unstick the door. It's warped again from moisture. Another sign. Wood moves differently when it's not frozen solid. You grab your stick, wedge the door open, and breathe deep. Still cold. But not cruel. You step outside and look around. Snow piles are smaller. The wind carries less bite. The air smells less like smoke, more like earth. You kneel, brush back a patch of melting slush with your bare hand. The dirt beneath is still hard, still unwilling. But it's there, waiting. And so are you. Evening returns, slower now, less aggressive. The shadows stretch long across the melting snow like they're enjoying the extra space. The fire is still necessary, absolutely, but it's not fighting as hard. You can sit beside it without leaning in like your life depends on it. Maybe it still does, but not in that panicked way. You've made it. Well, almost. The air smells different, still damp, still full of smoke and wet wool and things that might never wash out, but now there's something underneath. Something faint and green and ancient, the first breath of thawing moss. You'd forgotten what dirt smells like when it's alive. You step outside with a sliver of hope in your chest. It doesn't feel safe to hold on to it yet. But it's there, blooming quietly in your ribs. The world is changing, slowly but definitely. Snow still covers most of the ground, but not evenly. Patches have opened up muddy scars on the white. A trickle of water runs alongside the path where the snowmelt has carved its first escape route. Birds have returned, just one or two, singing like they're testing the acoustics. You stop walking, eyes closed, and just listen. Robin. Your brain stutters. You haven't heard one in months. You didn't realize how much you missed it. That tiny voice, hopeful, reckless, defiant against the last breath of winter. Behind you, the village is stirring in ways that feel different from survival. A woman hauls out the wash tub, not because she needs to, but because she can. Someone's repairing a fence. Someone else is on the roof, kicking down the last stubborn icicles with theatrical grunts. The kids are outside. Not just to fetch water, or help dig out a stuck goat, but to play. Really play. You watch them sprint through the slush, falling, squealing, getting up again. Their boots leave trails through the snow like wild brushstrokes on a half-frozen canvas. Inside, someone's baking. Not just boiling, baking. A crust of bread, slightly burned on one edge, but it smells like civilization. Like something beyond winter. You nearly cry. The goat tries to eat your sleeve again. You let her. People are still coughing. That hasn't changed. The old man's still hunched by the fire, and your toe still aches when the air shifts. You know the frost will take a few more people before it's done. It always does. But the village is waking. You feel it in your marrow. Soon you'll be in the fields again, sowing seeds into damp soil with fingers that can't quite bend like they used to. You'll complain about the rain, about blisters, about weeds. But you'll do it, gladly. Because blisters aren't frostbite, rain isn't hunger, and weeds don't howl outside your door at midnight. Brother Martin says nothing these days. He just walks the path behind the chapel barefoot, even now. You think he's trying to greet spring on its own terms. Or maybe he's punishing himself for surviving. Monks are weird like that. The snow falls one last time the next morning. A farewell dusting. Not even an inch. You watch it melt before it touches the ground. Steam rising like the earth is exhaling. You whisper, "Thank you," though you're not sure to whom. And that night, for the first time, you leave the door cracked. Just an inch. Not enough to let in wolves, but enough to let in spring. Now you lie back in your straw bed, cloaked in quiet. The fire has faded to low red coals, their glow softening every hard edge of the hut. The goat is asleep. The chickens are silent. The pig lets out one long, shuddering sigh and settles for the night. Outside, a breeze whispers through the thatch. Gentle now, no longer cruel. It brushes your cheeks like a mother tucking in her child. The moonlight spills across the floor in silver lines, and somewhere in the woods, water runs free again. You feel it in your bones. The deep freeze has passed. You're still here. Somehow. Your body is sore. Your mind is heavy. But you're not hungry. Not tonight. You're not shaking from the cold. You're not dreading tomorrow. For the first time in weeks, your chest rises and falls without a wheeze, without a tightness, without a threat. Tomorrow the sun will come a little sooner. The dirt will be a little softer. The path will be a little clearer. And you, sleeping here among fur and fire and faded breath, will wake up in a world that remembers how to grow again. So let go of the long nights. Let go of the frost-bitten mornings. Let go of the coughing and the smoke and the silence that pressed too hard on your ribs. You've made it through the worst winter. Let the thaw take your fear. The dreams carry you now. The story ends here. Close your eyes. Drift deep. Sweet dreams.